On a Palm Beach evening, a man with a famous last name walked into a public space, holding the hand of a woman the cameras did not expect. Donald Trump Jr. was not alone. Beside him was Bettina Anderson, a Palm Beach socialite, and the photographs moved through the gossip channels the way such photographs always do, quickly and without permission. Within days of those pictures circulating, the President of the United States, Donald Trump Sr., nominated Kimberly Guilfoyle to serve as the United States ambassador to Greece. The timing was not subtle, and the press noticed. Then, on December 15, 2025, in the East Room of the White House, the president stood before a Christmas reception and announced that his son was engaged. The bride-to-be was not the woman who had shared his life for 6 years. It was the woman from the photographs. Watch the sequence again. A romance goes public with someone new. The former partner, still wearing the engagement ring, still owning the house they bought together, is named to a post on the other side of the Atlantic. Then, weeks later, the man she loved stands in his father's house and celebrates a future that does not include her. There is no public statement from her that day. There is no press conference. There is only the silence of someone who has been moved, carefully, out of the frame. That is the picture this series opens with. Not a birth date, not a resume line. A woman standing just outside the room where the announcement is made, on a different continent, in a job she did not ask for, in the way most ambassadors ask for their posts. The story the public was sold for years was the story of a woman who had built the Trump family's fundraising operation with her bare hands. 6 years of donor calls, of rallies, of travel, of persuading wealthy skeptics to write 7-figure checks to a political project that many of their peers considered unserious. The story included an image that has now passed into the permanent record of American politics. In August of 2020, with the country locked down by a pandemic, she stood in an empty convention hall and delivered a speech to rows of empty chairs. The cameras caught her, alone on the stage, and the line she spoke in that moment became the line she would be remembered for. The best is yet to come. She said it then as a promise. She would say it in different forms for years. Now we are asked to look at that promise again. The convention speech, the ring bought in Dubai, the house, the years of work, the man, and finally, the photographs in Palm Beach that told her what words had not. You have to understand who the man was at the center of this arrangement. Donald Trump Jr. was 40 years old when the relationship became public in the spring of 2018. He had recently separated from his wife of 13 years, Vanessa Hayden Trump, with whom he had 5 children. He was the eldest son of a sitting president. He was, by any measure of cable news attention, one of the most recognizable political figures in the country. Kimberly Guilfoyle was 49. She was 12 years his senior. She had been through 2 marriages already. She had prosecuted homicides in Los Angeles. She had built a television career that ended, as we will see, in an investigation and a settlement. She had a son of her own. And she had, by the spring of 2018, decided that her future was bound to the Trump project. They met in Republican circles. They appeared together at rallies, at fundraisers, at Mar-a-Lago for holidays and family photographs. By 2019 and 2020, the relationship looked, from the outside, institutionally stable. On New Year's Eve of 2020, he proposed. The ring was a 13-carat emerald-cut diamond purchased in Dubai. They bought a house together. They were seen at events. There were reports of wedding planning. Anyone watching would have concluded that the next public event would be a wedding. The wedding never came. What came instead was a slow-motion dissolution that the couple and the apparatus around them chose not to name. In the first half of 2024, the relationship was over, even as the posts kept coming. On April 24th, Donald Trump Jr. published a 6-year anniversary message to her on social media. The words were warm and certain. "Happy 6-year anniversary at Kimberly Guilfoyle. Thanks for always being there, no matter what the haters are throwing our way. I love you." She posted love notes of her own in April and in May. They were addressed to a man who was, by then, already moving towards someone else. In July of 2024, at the Republican National Convention, she was seated directly in front of Bettina Anderson. The two women, the fiancé and the woman who would become the fiancé, were in the same frame. By September, the photographs that would change the story had already been taken. Trump Jr. and Anderson, holding hands, the picture that every gossip outlet had been waiting to confirm. When asked about it in December of 2024, through page 6, Trump Jr. used the language of soft closure. He said they would never stop caring for each other. He said they would always keep a special bond. The bond was real. It was also ending. On December 10, 2024, in the same week the tabloid photographs of his son and Anderson had fully circulated, Donald Trump Sr. nominated Kimberly Guilfoyle to be the United States ambassador to Greece. The announcement went up on Truth Social. The words described her as a close friend and ally, whose extensive experience in leadership in law, media, and politics, along with her sharp intellect, made her supremely qualified. The post added that she was perfectly suited to foster strong bilateral relations with Greece. Read those words again, and notice what is not said. There is no mention of fundraising, no mention of the 6 years she gave to the family operation, no mention of the engagement that was, as far as the public knew, still intact. The framing was professional. The framing was also strategic. It placed her on a different continent. It required her to give up the campaign and finance work that had been her primary political identity. It arrived with timing that made the political arithmetic legible to anyone who chose to read it. Substack writers, in the weeks that followed, used a word that stuck. They called it the Guilfoyle exile. Others described the post as a golden parachute, the polite term for a soft landing offered to someone whose usefulness, in the room she came from, has ended. Both descriptions were circulating at once. Both were partially true. The position was genuinely prestigious. The ambassadorship to Greece is a Senate-confirmed post with real diplomatic weight. She would, in time, become the first woman to hold it. At the same time, the appointment was a way of honoring someone you can no longer accommodate at the center of the family story. This is the story the press told in headlines. This is the story the public saw. What the public did not see, at that moment, was the longer record behind the woman in the photographs. The public did not see the early years in San Francisco. The public did not see the prosecutorial wins in 2 district attorneys' offices. The public did not see the marriage to a man who would become governor of California. The public did not see the television career that ended mid-contract with an internal investigation and a settlement that the New Yorker would later report at upward of $4 million. The public did not see the memoir, published 2026, in which that man would describe their courtship as a period of going through the motions, a partnership of 2 strivers using each other as a means to an end. Those are the chapters ahead. For now, stay with the image from the opening. A man holding hands with a woman who is not his fiancée. A father nominating his son's former fiancée to a post 3,000 miles away. A son taking the microphone at the White House Christmas reception, after his father has just announced the new engagement. Trump Jr. spoke after his father's announcement. He said he was at a loss for words. He said he wanted to wish everyone a very happy holiday season, a Merry Christmas, a very happy New Year. He thanked Anderson, using the Italianate spelling the source rendered as Bettina, for what he called that one word. Yes. He called it a big win for the end of the year. A woman 3,000 miles away, in Athens, in a residence she had just decorated, watched the clip, or did not. By January of 2026, she would tell the Times she was happy for him. She would say she wished him, of course, all the best. She would move the conversation along. She would return to her work. So the question this series begins with is not a small one. It is the question the convention speech asked, the question the engagement ring asked, the question the nomination asked. When you spend 6 years orbiting someone else's power, building someone else's donor network, sleeping in someone else's house, raising money for someone else's father, who pays the price when the orbit ends, and who decides where you land? Is the ambassadorship an honor? Is it a removal? Is it both, dressed up as one? The rest of this series will go looking for the answer in the parts of the record that the photographs did not show. The childhood, the mother lost at 11, the law school where she paid tuition by modeling for Macy's and Victoria's Secret, the homicides she tried in Los Angeles, the marriage to a future governor, the television platform that ended in a 42-page draft complaint and a settlement reported by the New Yorker at upward of $4 million, the campaign work that made her indispensable to a family that would, in the end, send her to Athens. Continue with the next part, and the record begins. The story behind the photographs. The public version of Kimberly Guilfoyle was a story of unbroken ascent. A lawyer who became a television name who became a Republican fixture who became the fundraising engine of a presidential operation, and then, in the eyes of the public, the woman at the center of the most talked-about political romance of the cycle. Watched from a distance, in 2020, the convention speech looked like the peak of a climb. She stood in an empty hall, cameras rolling, and told the country that the best was yet to come. For a viewer who knew nothing else, the rest of the story could have ended there. But the public version was not the only version. There was another record, filed in different places, written in different tones, that told a different story. 2 years before the Palm Beach photographs surfaced, that record had already been written. It sat in the human resources files of a cable news network. It sat in the memory of a former assistant who had been paid to walk away. It sat in the unpublished pages of a memoir, written by a man who had once been her husband, who would later describe their courtship as something he had been going through the motions of performing. None of it was on the marquee. All of it was in the file. The pivot in this story is not the breakup. The pivot is the record that was already there, waiting, before the breakup ever happened. Look at the trajectory as it was visible on television. In 2006, after the end of her first marriage, Guilfoyle joined Fox News. She moved through the lineup, co-hosting different programs, building a presence on cable that was both ideological and personal. In 2011, she became a permanent co-host of The Five, the network's flagship roundtable show at 5 in the evening, and she stayed there for 12 years. 12 years is a generation in cable news. 12 years is the length of a presidential run from announcement to second term. By the time she left, she was one of the most recognizable faces on the channel. She also wrote a book. The title was Making the Case: How to Be Your Own Best Advocate. The cover used a headshot. The thesis was simple: argue for yourself. Build the narrative. Do not wait for someone else to do it for you. The book sold on the strength of her television profile. By 2015, she was a regular at Republican Party events. By 2017, after Sean Spicer's departure as White House press secretary, her name was in circulation for that role. She did not get it. But the fact that her name was in circulation at all tells you where the cameras thought she belonged. Then, in April of 2018, the relationship with Donald Trump Jr. was confirmed. He was 40, recently separated from his wife of 13 years, the father of 5. She was 49, 12 years older. They had met at the political gatherings she had begun to haunt. 3 months later, in July of 2018, Fox News put out a single sentence. Fox News has parted ways with Kimberly Guilfoyle. No reason was given. The statement was one line on a network that is rarely satisfied with one line. The official public explanation, the one that traveled through friendly media, was that the parting was voluntary. She was leaving to join a pro-Trump political action organization. The framing was career forward. The framing was a launch, not a landing. Years remained on her contract. The framing did not address what the framing was covering. In the same month of July 2018, HuffPost published a report. The report drew on interviews with 21 sources. The reporting was explicit that it came from people with direct knowledge of an internal investigation at Fox News. According to those sources, Guilfoyle's departure followed a year-long human resources investigation into alleged inappropriate workplace behavior. The allegations, as reported, included showing personal photographs of male genitalia to colleagues and identifying whose they were. The allegations included regularly discussing sexual matters at work. The allegations included emotionally abusive behavior toward hair, makeup, and support staff. The reporting did not assert guilt. The reporting described what 21 people with direct knowledge had told HuffPost. Guilfoyle's attorney, John Singer, called the allegations unequivocally baseless. He said they had been viciously made by disgruntled and self-interested employees. Guilfoyle herself denied them. She offered no additional comment. The story did not go away. It sat in the public record. Then, in October of 2020, Jane Mayer of The New Yorker published a more detailed account of the same underlying events. Mayer's reporting drew on 2 well-informed sources. The piece added detail that the earlier HuffPost report had not included. According to Mayer, a former female assistant had drafted a 42-page complaint in November of 2018. The complaint detailed allegations of sexual harassment. The complaint accused Guilfoyle of creating a hostile work environment that included requiring the assistant to work at Guilfoyle's apartment, where Guilfoyle would sometimes appear without clothing. The complaint alleged that Guilfoyle showed the assistant lewd images of men with whom Guilfoyle had sexual relations, and images sent by fans. The complaint alleged that when lawyers from the firm Paul Weiss had been retained by Fox News in 2016 to investigate broader misconduct at the network, Guilfoyle had attempted to buy the assistant's silence. When that approach was rebuffed, Guilfoyle allegedly warned the assistant that aspects of her private life could be made public. According to Mayer's reporting, Fox News reached a settlement with the assistant. The settlement was reported to be upward of $4 million. The settlement was covered by a non-disclosure agreement. The 42-page complaint was never filed in court. Guilfoyle's representatives declined to comment to The New Yorker. Fox News declined to comment on the settlement. Take the sequence in. 2 outlets, separated by more than 2 years, ran versions of the same underlying story. HuffPost brought 21 sources. The New Yorker added the 42-page draft complaint and the $4 million settlement. The reporting was explicit that the sources had direct knowledge. The reporting did not declare guilt. The reporting laid out what documents, what internal investigators, and what witnesses had described. The complaint itself was never adjudicated. The settlement was paid. The non-disclosure agreement was signed. The case, in the formal legal sense, never existed. It existed in the file. It existed in the press. It existed in the questions that no one in the Trump political operation ever asked publicly. This is the part of the record that the convention speech did not mention. This is the part of the record that the engagement ring did not reference. This is the part of the record that the photographs in Palm Beach did not undo. And there is another record, older and quieter, that the cameras also missed. In 2001, Kimberly Guilfoyle had married Gavin Newsom at St. Ignatius Church in San Francisco. At the time, Newsom was a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. She was an assistant district attorney. The wedding drew an 8-page spread in Harper's Bazaar. The magazine compared the couple to the Kennedys, and the framing took. The San Francisco Chronicle called the wedding the social event of the year. For roughly 3 years, the framing held. In 2003, Newsom was elected mayor of San Francisco. 3 days after his inauguration, Guilfoyle flew to New York to take a new job as a host on Court TV. The bi-coastal arrangement was immediate, and it was permanent. Newsom would later tell the San Francisco Chronicle that the transcontinental arrangement had taken a huge toll personally. The marriage was functionally over well before it was legally over. The joint divorce filing came in January of 2005. The divorce was finalized in February of 2006. After the divorce was finalized, Newsom would admit to an extramarital affair with a different woman than Guilfoyle, his campaign manager's wife. The admission came after the marriage was already over. It did not contradict the earlier pattern. It reinforced it. The longer reflection came later. In 2026, Newsom published a memoir. The title was Young Man in a Hurry. In the memoir, Newsom described the relationship with Guilfoyle in unusually direct terms. He wrote that he had become quite skilled at repressing his feelings and that she allowed him that emotional distance. He described the courtship as a period of going through the motions. He described the marriage as a convenient platform for two strivers who treated each step of their careers and each other as a means to an end. A San Francisco city official told the Washington Post something similar in different words. They felt, the official said, like they were passing through. Newsom also described a moment of clarity that came during the period when he allowed same-sex marriages to be performed in San Francisco in 2004. The cause and the political moment made him feel, in his own description, most fully himself. She was not there. She was in New York, hosting a television show. He realized in that period that the marriage was over. The cause that gave him his political identity was not one she was present for. The political life he was building required her absence, and her absence defined what the marriage had become. Read that record together with the Fox News record. Read it together with the convention speech. A woman who had prosecuted homicides in 2 district attorneys' offices. A woman who had modeled to pay for law school. A woman whose mother died when she was 11 and who had built her entire adult identity around an engine of personal drive. A woman who had married a man she helped place in the public eye and who watched that man describe their marriage years later as something they had been passing through. None of this was on the marquee. None of it was on the convention stage in 2020. None of it was on the Christmas reception in 2025. All of it was in the file. This is what the public was not told. The woman who built the Trump fundraising operation was the same woman whose departure from cable news followed an internal investigation and a settlement reported at upward of $4 million. The woman whose engagement was announced on New Year's Day of 2022 had already been married twice, both times briefly, both times publicly, both times with the pattern of an intense, high-profile beginning, followed by a collapse when career logistics proved incompatible. The woman whose voice had become a fixture of conservative media was also the subject of a 42-page draft complaint that was never filed, and a settlement that was never adjudicated, and a memoir in which her ex-husband described their life together as going through the motions. The convention speech, in this light, is not a false document. It is a partial document. It is what a person sounds like when the rest of the record has been kept out of the room. "The best is yet to come," she said, into an empty hall. The cameras caught her. The chairs sat empty. The words traveled. Stay with that image for one more moment. A woman, alone on a stage, promising a future she believes in a room that cannot hear her. Then remember the record behind her, the complaint, the settlement, the memoir, the 2 marriages that ended when the cameras moved on, the 3rd relationship that ended when the cameras moved on again, and the ambassadorship to Greece, offered in the same week the photographs confirmed what was already happening. The record behind the photographs is the record this series is going to read. Continue with the next part, and the story goes back to the beginning. San Francisco, a girl, a mother who did not survive, a father who did, a path through UC Davis and law school and the courtroom that would, eventually, put her on television. Before the television, before the cables, before the weddings and the settlement and the ambassadorship, there was a girl in San Francisco whose mother died. Start there, not because the record demands it, because the woman herself, across decades of interviews in both parties, kept returning to it. Kimberly Ann Guilfoyle was born on March 9, 1969, in San Francisco. Her father was Anthony Guilfoyle, an Irish immigrant who had made himself into a fixture of Bay Area politics. He would later become a key advisor to his son-in-law, a man who would become governor of California, and we will get to that marriage in its own time. Her mother was Mercedes Marie Garina, born in Puerto Rico. The household was Catholic in the way households were Catholic in that part of California in that decade. There were values. There were expectations. There was also a particular kind of immigrant ambition, the kind that does not admit rest, because rest is what the previous generation escaped. Mercedes died of leukemia when Kimberly was 11. The fact is on the record. The fact has been repeated by the subject herself in adult interviews as the formative biographical event. The fact was the source, she has said, of her drive. The fact was the source of her early independence. The fact is the kind of loss that either crushes a person or builds a particular architecture inside them. In her case, the architecture was visible very early. She is described being raised afterward by her father, in a household defined by his ambition for her and by the shared Catholic values she would continue to claim across both Democratic and Republican public lives. A brother, Tony Guilfoyle, was part of that household too. The family was small. The absence at its center was not. Stay with the absence, because it explains what comes next. A girl who loses her mother at 11 does not become a prosecutor on accident. A girl who loses her mother at 11 does not become a television figure on accident. A girl who loses her mother at 11 does not end up, 2 decades later, alone on a stage in an empty convention hall, promising the country that the best is yet to come, on accident. Something was being built in that household, and it was being built deliberately, and the building did not stop. She went to UC Davis. She graduated magna cum laude with a bachelor's degree in political science. The phrase matters. Magna cum laude is not a phrase the family would have used lightly in a household that valued the upward mobility of a first-generation immigrant's child. She then enrolled at the University of San Francisco School of Law. Tuition had to be paid. The family did not have unlimited means. She modeled during law school for Macy's and for Victoria's Secret. The detail is small, and it is not small. It tells you the kind of energy the woman was willing to spend to keep moving. It also tells you something about the kind of woman who can stand in front of a jury in a murder trial and be looked at, and use that as a professional asset. During law school, she interned at the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. The internship is the pivot. Everything that follows on the professional side of her life descends from that office. After law school, she became a prosecutor, first in San Francisco on sex crimes and homicides, then in Los Angeles for 4 years as a deputy district attorney in the Major Crimes Division. The work was real. The work was not a credential. She tried murder cases in front of juries. She won them. The colleagues who worked with her in those years, the journalists who later wrote about those years, described her in terms that are worth quoting back. They described her as genuinely skilled. They described her as able to build a narrative for 12 jurors. They described her as willing to be looked at and as someone who used being looked at as a professional asset. That last phrase is important. A prosecutor who is comfortable in front of a jury is a prosecutor who can convert attention into persuasion. The same quality, deployed on television, is the quality that turns a legal analyst into a host. Which is exactly what happened. In 2004, a case out of Modesto, California, drew the kind of national attention that only a few cases ever draw. The Scott Peterson trial, in which a husband was prosecuted for the murder of his pregnant wife, Lacey Peterson, ran through the year. Networks booked legal analysts around the clock. Kimberly Guilfoyle appeared on Good Morning America and on other national programs. The trial turned a working prosecutor into a recognizable face. The credibility she built in those appearances became the foundation of the rest of her career. Every later opportunity, the court TV job, the Fox News job, the Republican Party regularity, all of it rested on a base of credibility that was established in that 1 year. Notice the trajectory. It is the trajectory of someone who converts every platform into the next platform. The prosecutorial wins convert into media credibility. The media credibility converts into a national television platform. The national platform converts into political access. The political access converts into the next thing. At no point in this sequence is the woman resting. The architecture her father built after her mother's death was built to keep her in motion. Now consider what the architecture looked like from the outside in 2004. She was 35. She had been a prosecutor in 2 of the most competitive district attorney's offices in the country. She had appeared on Good Morning America during the biggest trial of the year. She had ended a relationship with a man she had been seeing, a young politician in San Francisco named Gavin Newsom, and that relationship was not yet public. The next year, she would marry him. The year after that, she would move to New York. The pattern that would define her next 20 years, the pattern of intense, high-profile beginnings followed by collapse when career logistics proved incompatible, was already being set. But the prosecutorial record itself is the part the public never got back to. Once the television career took off, The murder trials receded. Once the Republican fundraisers took over, the courtroom disappeared. The skill was real. The skill was the foundation. The skill was also, by the end of the first decade of the 2000s, a piece of biographical furniture that journalists referenced and then moved past. The convention speech did not mention the juries. The Christmas announcement did not mention the juries. The ambassadorship announcement did not mention the juries. What the public was given instead was the image of a woman who had always belonged at the center of the room. The image of a woman whose voice, on the 5, was the voice that cable news had decided to amplify. The image of a woman whose engagement ring, in 2022, was photographed from every angle by every gossip outlet in the country. The image of a woman who, in 2024, was seen at the Republican National Convention seated directly in front of the woman who would, within months, replace her. None of those images refer back to the courtroom. All of them assume the courtroom is in the past. It is worth pausing on what the courtroom actually gave her, beyond the credentials. The courtroom gave her a relationship to being watched. A prosecutor who tries murder cases in front of 12 jurors is a person who has learned to manage attention at close range. She has learned to build a story. She has learned to read a room. She has learned to convert the fact of being looked at into a professional tool. None of that disappears when the camera changes. None of that disappears when the platform changes. The same woman who could hold a jury in Los Angeles could hold a donor in a hotel suite in Palm Beach. The same woman who could hold a donor could hold a camera. The same woman who could hold a camera could hold a microphone at a White House Christmas reception, or at a Senate confirmation hearing, or at an Athens credential ceremony. The architecture, in other words, was not just ambition, it was trained. The woman who stood on that convention stage in 2020 had, by the time she got there, 30 years of practice in the specific skill of converting attention into outcome. The empty chairs in the hall were a problem of audience, not a problem of skill. The audience had been moved off-site by a pandemic. The skill remained intact. The skill is what got her to the ambassadorship. The skill is what got her into the Trump family's inner circle. The skill is what the cameras kept photographing, even after the relationships ended. So, before this series goes back to the marriages, to the television, to the investigation and the settlement, to the campaign, to the breakup and the announcement, hold the record of who she actually was before any of that. A girl in San Francisco who lost her mother. A daughter of an Irish immigrant father who had his own ambitions for her. A magna cum laude graduate of UC Davis. A law student at the University of San Francisco who paid tuition by modeling for Macy's and for Victoria's Secret. An intern, then a prosecutor, then a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles, trying murder cases in front of juries and winning them. A legal analyst on Good Morning America during the Scott Peterson trial of 2004. A woman whose media face, after 2004, became the public record, and whose prosecutorial face became the foundation under it. The architecture was built. The architecture was trained. The architecture was tested in courtrooms for years before it was ever tested on cable. And the architecture, as we will see, would be tested again on a different continent, in a different language, in a residence she had just decorated, with a son she had brought with her, in a job that arrived in the same week the man she loved was photographed holding hands with someone else. Continue with the next part, and the architecture meets the next marriage, the one the press called a new Kennedy story. The one her ex-husband would later describe, in his own memoir, as going through the motions. The one that ends when the cameras move on, the way they always had. The first marriage the cameras really noticed was the marriage to a man who would become governor of California. Watch the news cycle around it. The wedding was in December of 2001 at St. Ignatius Church in San Francisco. The groom was Gavin Newsom, then a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. The bride was Kimberly Guilfoyle, then an assistant district attorney. The press did what the press does with a young politician and a young prosecutor who look the part. Harper's Bazaar ran an 8-page spread. The magazine compared the couple to the Kennedys. The comparison took. The San Francisco Chronicle called the wedding the social event of the year. The framing held, roughly, for 3 years. In 2003, Newsom was elected mayor of San Francisco. 3 days after his inauguration, Guilfoyle flew to New York to start a new job as a host on Court TV. The arrangement was bi-coastal from the first week. The arrangement was also the arrangement's undoing. Newsom would later tell the San Francisco Chronicle that the transcontinental setup had taken a huge toll personally. The toll was not theoretical. The marriage was functionally over well before it was legally over. The joint divorce filing came in January of 2005. The divorce was finalized in February of 2006. After the divorce was finalized, Newsom admitted to an extramarital affair with a different woman than his ex-wife, his campaign manager's wife. The admission came after the marriage was already over. It confirmed a pattern that did not require the affair to be visible. Two strivers, both moving up, both unable to make the geography work. A politician in San Francisco, a television host in New York. The marriage as a project that the careers could not support. Then, years later, came the longer reflection. In 2026, Newsom published a memoir titled Young Man in a Hurry. In the memoir, Newsom described the relationship with Guilfoyle in terms that were unusually direct for a politician writing about a former spouse. He wrote that he had become quite skilled at repressing his feelings, and that she had allowed him that emotional distance. He described the courtship as a period of going through the motions. He described the marriage as a convenient platform for two strivers who treated each step of their careers, and each other, as a means to an end. A San Francisco city official, quoted by the Washington Post, said something similar in different words. They had felt, the official said, like they were passing through. Newsom also described a specific moment when he realized the marriage was over. The moment came during the period when he allowed same-sex marriages to be performed in San Francisco in 2004. The cause and the political moment made him feel, in his own description, most fully himself. She was not there. She was in New York, hosting a television show. The political identity he was building required her absence, and her absence defined what the marriage had become. Read that record against the next one. 3 months after the Newsom divorce was finalized, in May of 2006, Guilfoyle married a furniture heir named Eric Valancy. A son, Ronan, was born that same year. The marriage lasted 3 years. The divorce came in 2009. Same pattern. Intense, high-profile beginning. Collapse when the careers could not be made to fit. So when the relationship with Donald Trump Jr. was confirmed in April of 2018, the public record already held 2 previous marriages and the same collapse pattern. She was 49, he was 40, recently separated from his wife of 13 years, Vanessa Hayden Trump, with whom he had 5 children. They had met at the Republican events she had begun to haunt since 2015. The relationship went public. 3 months later, in July of 2018, Fox News put out a single sentence. Fox News has parted ways with Kimberly Guilfoyle. No reason given. Years remained on her contract. The official public explanation, the one that traveled through friendly media, was that the parting was voluntary. She was leaving to join a pro-Trump political action organization. The framing was a launch, not a landing. The framing did not address the investigation that had been running inside the network. In the same month, July of 2018, HuffPost published a report based on interviews with 21 sources. The reporting was explicit that it came from people with direct knowledge of an internal investigation at Fox News. According to those sources, Guilfoyle's departure followed a year-long human resources investigation into alleged inappropriate workplace behavior. The allegations included showing personal photographs of male genitalia to colleagues and identifying whose they were. The allegations included regularly discussing sexual matters at work. The allegations included emotionally abusive behavior toward hair, makeup, and support staff. The reporting did not declare guilt. The reporting described what 21 people with direct knowledge had told HuffPost. Guilfoyle's attorney, John Singer, called the allegations unequivocally baseless. He said they had been viciously made by disgruntled and self-interested employees. Guilfoyle herself denied them. She offered no additional comment. The story did not go away. It sat in the public record. Then, in October of 2020, Jane Mayer of The New Yorker published a more detailed account. Mayer's reporting drew on two well-informed sources. The piece added detail that HuffPost had not included. According to Mayer, a former female assistant had drafted a 42-page complaint in November of 2018. The complaint detailed allegations of sexual harassment. The complaint accused Guilfoyle of creating a hostile work environment that included requiring the assistant to work at Guilfoyle's apartment, where Guilfoyle would sometimes appear without clothing. The complaint alleged that Guilfoyle showed the assistant lewd images of men with whom Guilfoyle had sexual relations, and images sent by fans. The complaint alleged that when lawyers from the firm Paul Weiss had been retained by Fox News in 2016 to investigate broader misconduct at the network, Guilfoyle had attempted to buy the assistant's silence. When that approach was rebuffed, Guilfoyle allegedly warned the assistant that aspects of her private life could be made public. According to Mayer, Fox News reached a settlement with the assistant. The settlement was reported to be upward of $4 million. The settlement was covered by a non-disclosure agreement. The 42-page complaint was never filed in court. Guilfoyle's representatives declined to comment to The New Yorker. Fox News declined to comment on the settlement. Take the sequence in. Two outlets, separated by more than 2 years, ran versions of the same underlying story. HuffPost brought 21 sources. The New Yorker added the 42-page draft complaint and the $4 million settlement. The reporting was explicit that the sources had direct knowledge. The reporting did not declare guilt. The reporting laid out what documents, what internal investigators, and what witnesses had described. The complaint itself was never adjudicated. The settlement was paid, the non-disclosure agreement was signed. The case, in the formal legal sense, never existed. Notice what did not happen. The story did not derail her role in the Trump campaign. It did not produce sustained pressure from the Republican donor class she was managing. Donald Trump Sr. continued to refer to her as one of the most capable people he knew. Donald Trump Jr. continued the relationship. The campaign continued to deploy her at events and feature her in fundraising materials. Her attorney's characterization of the accusations as vicious and baseless was amplified in friendly media. The story existed in the public record. The story did not change the trajectory of her public life inside the Trump orbit. That is the paradox this part of the record holds. A year-long internal investigation at Fox News, a 42-page draft complaint from a former assistant, a settlement reported at upward of $4 million, a non-disclosure agreement, a press that reported the allegations twice, 2 years apart, with sources who had direct knowledge, and a political operation that absorbed all of it without breaking stride. The press did the press's job. The political operation did the political operation's job. The two jobs did not have to agree. They did not have to reconcile. They could both proceed. This is the part of the story the convention speech did not mention. This is the part of the story the engagement ring did not reference. This is the part of the story the Christmas reception did not address. The woman who would, in 2025, become the first female United States ambassador to Greece had, 7 years earlier, parted ways with a cable news network under the cloud of an investigation that the network itself had run, and had paid upward of $4 million to make go away. And the woman who, in 2026, would be thanked by name at her own Senate confirmation hearing by the man who had been her fiancé, the man who had moved on, had been the subject of a memoir written by her first ex-husband, in which that ex-husband described their courtship as a period of going through the motions, and their marriage as a convenient platform for two strivers who treated each other as a means to an end. So the record behind the photographs in Palm Beach is not just one record. It is at least 3. The first marriage, the second marriage, the cable news investigation, the memoir, the settlement, the non-disclosure agreement, the 42-page draft complaint that was never filed, the press that reported on it twice, the political operation that absorbed it all. None of these records were on the convention stage. None of them were on the Christmas reception stage. All of them were in the file. Continue with the next part, and the file meets the campaign. The work that made her indispensable to a family that would, in the end, send her to Athens. After Fox, she did not retreat. She joined America First Policies, the pro-Trump political action organization that had been set up in the early months of the administration to push the agenda outside the formal channels of government. From there, she moved into the Trump campaign itself, becoming National Finance Chair. The title was not ceremonial. The role was genuinely demanding. It meant relationship management with major donors. It meant pitching skeptical, deep-pocketed Republicans whose default setting, in those years, was skepticism of the family's political operation. It meant running a complex machine across multiple states and multiple cycles. It meant being on the phone at hours that people in less demanding jobs do not think about. By the accounts of people who worked with her on fundraising, she was a skilled solicitor. She had an existing network. She had a name that commanded attention in Republican donor circles. She had a personal energy described, by those same accounts, as genuinely compelling in small rooms. The small room was where the work happened. The small room was where the 7-figure check happened. The small room was where the architecture her father had built after her mother's death paid its biggest dividends. She and Trump Jr. traveled the country together throughout the 2018 midterm cycle, the 2020 presidential campaign, and the years in between. They appeared at rallies together. They appeared in family photographs at Mar-a-Lago for holidays and for events. She was visually and functionally integrated into the Trump family's public life in a way that made the relationship appear institutionally stable. The cameras saw the rallies. The cameras saw the holidays. The cameras saw the family photographs. The cameras did not see the small rooms. On New Year's Eve of 2020, Donald Trump Jr. proposed. The engagement was kept private through 2021. The public announcement came on New Year's Day of 2022. The ring was a 13-carat emerald-cut diamond purchased in Dubai. They bought a home together. There were reports of wedding planning. There were photographs at events. From the outside, the trajectory was proceeding toward a wedding. The wedding never happened. In the first half of 2024, the relationship broke up. Sources told the Palm Beach Daily News that the couple had broken up before Easter of 2024. The breakup was not announced. The breakup did not interrupt the public performance. In April of 2024, Donald Trump Jr. posted a 6-year anniversary message to her on social media. "Happy 6-year anniversary at Kimberly Guilfoyle. Thanks for always being there, no matter what the haters are throwing our way. I love you." She posted love notes of her own in April and in May, addressed to a soulmate, addressed to a man who was, by then, already moving towards someone else. In July of 2024, at the Republican National Convention, she was seated directly in front of Bettina Anderson. Anderson was a Palm Beach socialite who had already been seen in Trump Jr.'s orbit at the convention. The two women, the fiancé and the woman who would become the fiancé, were in the same frame. The cameras saw that too. By September of 2024, the photographs that would change the story had been taken. Trump Jr. and Anderson holding hands. The photograph that every gossip outlet had been waiting to confirm. The photograph that closed the question the anniversary posts had been pretending was still open. In December of 2024, Trump Jr. told Page Six that he and Guilfoyle would never stop caring for each other and that they would always keep a special bond. The phrasing was soft closure. The phrasing closed something without admitting it was closed. On December 10, 2024, in the same week the tabloid photographs of his son and Anderson had fully circulated, Donald Trump Sr. nominated Kimberly Guilfoyle to be the United States ambassador to Greece. The announcement went up on Truth Social. The president described her as a close friend and ally, whose extensive experience in leadership in law, media, and politics, along with her sharp intellect, made her supremely qualified. The Post added that she was perfectly suited to foster strong bilateral relations with Greece. Read the Post carefully and notice what is not in it. There is no mention of the 6 years of fundraising. There is no mention of the campaign role. There is no mention of the engagement. The framing is professional. The framing is also strategic. The Post places her on a different continent. The Post requires her to give up the work that had been her primary political identity. The Post arrives in the same week the photographs of the man she loved, holding hands with another woman, have fully circulated. The sequencing was not subtle, and the press noticed. Substack writers, in the weeks that followed, used a phrase that stuck. They called it the Guilfoyle exile. Others, more politely, called the Post a golden parachute. Both descriptions were circulating at once. Both were partially true. The position itself was genuinely prestigious. The ambassadorship to Greece is a Senate-confirmed post with real diplomatic weight. She would, in time, become the first woman to hold it. At the same time, the appointment was a way of honoring someone you can no longer accommodate at the center of the family story. The honor was real. The removal was also real. Both things were true at once. That is what made the appointment so legible to anyone who chose to read it. Notice the specific details of what she gave up. She gave up the campaign work. She gave up the donor relationships she had spent 6 years building. She gave up the small rooms where her personal energy had been described by colleagues as genuinely compelling. She gave up the rallies and the family photographs at Mar-a-Lago. She gave up the cable news platform that had been the foundation of the rest. She gave up the proximity to the family whose political project she had helped fund. She gave all of that up for a post on the other side of the Atlantic. A post she had not trained for, a post that no one would have predicted for her based on the prior record. A post that arrived, in the public's reading, as the cost of the photographs in Palm Beach. The press did not invent that reading. The press reported it. The reading was generated by the timing itself. And notice the detail of what she did not have. Her prior experience included no foreign policy or diplomacy roles. Her prior experience was in prosecution, in cable news, in Republican fundraising. None of that is a traditional ambassadorial background. The traditional profile is someone who has served in the Foreign Service, or in a senior State Department role, or in a senior policy position on international affairs. She had none of that. What she had was a father-in-law who was the president, a former fiancé whose engagement was ending, and a press cycle that needed a dignified exit. That is not what the Truth Social post said. The Truth Social post described extensive experience in leadership. The Truth Social post described sharp intellect. The Truth Social post described being perfectly suited to foster strong bilateral relations with Greece. The post was not lying, it was curating. It was presenting the version of the record that made the appointment look like a reward. It was not presenting the version of the record that made the appointment look like an exit. Both versions existed. Both versions were on the public record. The press held them at once. So the question this part of the series is asking is not the question of whether the ambassadorship was an honor. Of course it was an honor. Senate confirmed. Real diplomatic responsibilities. A post that future ambassadors will read about in her file. The question is not whether it was a parachute. Of course it was a parachute. A soft landing offered at the precise moment when the woman was no longer useful in the room she came from. The question is whether the two things can be true at once. They can. They were. The press saw both. The public saw both. The commentators on Substack wrote about both. The woman herself, by the time the appointment was announced, was already 3,000 miles away from the photographs in Palm Beach. The architecture that had been built in San Francisco, the architecture that had been trained in 2 district attorneys' offices, the architecture that had been deployed in cable news, in campaign work, in small rooms with donors, was now being deployed somewhere else. The architecture was not the problem. The architecture had always been the woman's instrument. The architecture would serve her in Athens the way it had served her in Los Angeles, in New York, on the 5, in the Trump campaign. The architecture would also, as we will see in the next part, need to survive the Christmas reception in the East Room of the White House on December 15, 2025, when the father of the man she had loved stood at a microphone and announced the engagement of that man to the woman from the photographs. Continue with the next part, and the architecture arrives in Athens, a city that knows how to make a spectacle of a woman who understands spectacle. A city that, by multiple reports, had already begun to compare her to Jackie Kennedy Onassis. A city where the ambassadorship, whatever it had been in Washington, was about to become something else. The Senate confirmation hearing came in July of 2025. She sat before the Foreign Relations Committee and made her statement. I am absolutely committed to the people of Greece and to strengthening the bonds between our two great nations. I shall not disappoint. The committee confirmed her. She was sworn in on September 29, 2025, in Washington. She was confirmed by the Senate in September of 2025. She presented her credentials in Athens on November 4, 2025, to the President of the Hellenic Republic, Konstantin Tassoulas. With that ceremony, she became the first female United States ambassador to Greece. Watch the contrast. The confirmation hearing in Washington, formal, careful, the language of diplomatic commitment. The credential ceremony in Athens, formal again, but also something else. At the welcome ceremony, she linked arms with other guests in a lively Greek dance and kept pace as the music sped up. At the formal credential ceremony, she spoke again in the language she has used across decades of public life. I know we will do amazing things for these two exceptional countries. I will not disappoint the United States of America. I shall not disappoint Greece. The repetition of the phrase, I shall not disappoint, from the confirmation hearing to the credential ceremony, is not an accident. It is the architecture talking. It is the architecture that her father built after her mother's death. It is the architecture that she has been rebuilding in every room she has entered since. In the confirmation hearing statement, she thanked her closest family and friends, and she named them. Her son, Ronan, her brother, Tony Guilfoyle, and Donnie, still calling Donald Trump Jr. by his nickname even as he had moved on. The naming was a small act of continuity. The naming was also a small act of defiance. The man she had loved was, by the time of the hearing, publicly attached to another woman. The naming insisted on the version of the record in which the relationship still belonged to her in some form. By multiple reports, she made an impression in Athens quickly. The New York Times reported that she had been making late-night appearances at high-profile events and at nightclubs as a way to build relationships. The strategy was described by some diplomats as unconventional. Others described it as precisely calibrated to Athens's specific social environment. The contrast between the cable news face that cable news knew and the diplomatic face that Athens was meeting was, by some accounts, smaller than the cable news audience had assumed. Locals began to compare her to Jackie Kennedy Onassis. One insider told a reporter, "She understands spectacle. Athens loves a star, and right now, she's it." The work, by multiple reports, was substantive. She was championing United States-backed energy initiatives. She was pushing back on China's role in the port of Piraeus. She was attending ministerial meetings organized by the Atlantic Council. The ambassadorship was not a holding pattern. It was a working post with real diplomatic weight in a country whose relationship with the United States touches energy, shipping, NATO, and the Eastern Mediterranean. She brought her son Ronan to Athens. She decorated the residence. She posted on social media. The woman who had promised, in an empty convention hall in 2020, that the best was yet to come, was now a Senate-confirmed ambassador in a city that knew how to stage an entrance. Then came December 15, 2025. In the East Room of the White House, at a Christmas reception, Donald Trump Sr. announced that his son was engaged. The bride-to-be was Bettina Anderson, the man she had loved for 6 years, the man who had proposed on New Year's Eve of 2020, the man whose anniversary post she had answered with love notes of her own in April and May of 2024, was now standing in his father's house, in front of the cameras, accepting congratulations on a future that did not include her. Trump Jr. took the microphone after his father's announcement. He said he was at a loss for words. He said he wanted to wish everyone an incredible holiday season, a Merry Christmas, a very happy New Year. He thanked Bettina, the spelling the source rendered as Bettatina, for what he called that one word. Yes, he called it a big win for the end of the year. He appeared, by the video accounts of those present, genuinely happy. The cameras saw that too. She traveled to the United States when the conversation about the engagement became too loud to ignore from a distance. In January of 2026, she spoke to the Times. She said she was happy for him, the name rendered in the source as Dawn, a likely transcription artifact of Dawn, the same man she had been calling Donnie in her confirmation hearing. She said she wished him, of course, all the best. She moved swiftly to other topics. She returned to Athens. The structural pattern is visible from a distance. Newsom gave her the First Lady title, the social event of the year, the 8-page spread in Harper's Bazaar. Fox News gave her the television platform, which ended in an internal investigation and a settlement reported by The New Yorker at upward of $4 million. Trump Jr. gave her the campaign role, the engagement ring, the years of small rooms with donors. Donald Trump Sr. gave her the ambassadorship. Across 25 years, 2 political parties, 3 marriages, 2 presidential campaigns, she has never run out of things to be committed to. The commitment outlasts the relationships. The work outlasts the men. The architecture outlasts the rooms it was built for. The best is yet to come, she said into an empty convention hall in 2020. The cameras caught her. The chairs sat empty. The words traveled. The words, in 2026, are the words she is still saying, in a different room, on a different continent, in a different language, with a different microphone. Which returns the series to the question the convention speech asked, and the engagement ring did not answer. For whom does the best keep coming? Read the record again, in that order. A mother lost at 11. A father who built an architecture of ambition in the absence. A magna cum laude graduation from UC Davis. A law school paid for by modeling from Macy's and Victoria's Secret. Murder trials in 2 district attorneys' offices. The Scott Peterson trial of 2004, and the media face that came out of it. A marriage to a man who would become governor of California, who would later describe their courtship as going through the motions, and their marriage as a convenient platform for 2 strivers. A second marriage to a furniture heir, and a son named Ronan. 12 years on cable news, and an internal investigation that ended in a settlement reported at upward of $4 million and a non-disclosure agreement. The Trump campaign, the donor small rooms, the rallies, the holidays at Mar-a-Lago. The engagement announced on New Year's Day of 2022. The breakup that no one announced, and the anniversary posts that pretended it had not happened. The photographs in Palm Beach in September of 2024. The nomination in December. The ambassadorship. Athens. The credential ceremony. The Christmas reception in Washington, 3,000 miles away, where the man she loved stood in his father's house and announced his engagement to someone else. The Times interview in January of 2026. The return to Athens. That is the record. It is the record of a woman who has spent her entire adult life converting the next platform into the next commitment. It is the record of a woman whose skill set was built in courtrooms and deployed in cable news studios and in donor suites and in Senate confirmation hearings. It is the record of a woman whose personal life, on the public record, has followed the pattern of intense, high-profile beginnings followed by collapses when career logistics proved incompatible. It is the record of a woman who was the subject of a 42-page draft complaint and a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement and 2 press investigations, and whose political trajectory was not, in any visible way, altered by them. It is the record of a woman who was honored with a Senate-confirmed ambassadorship in the same week the man she loved was photographed holding hands with someone else. It is the record of a woman who is now, in 2026, in Athens, decorating a residence, attending Atlantic Council ministerial meetings, pushing back on China's role in Piraeus, making late-night appearances at nightclubs to build relationships, and posting on social media about the work. She is still in Athens. She is still working. She still believes it. That is the operating principle the convention speech named. The best is yet to come. She said it as a campaign slogan. She says it now as a self-description. The architecture does not rest. The architecture was not built to rest. The architecture was built by an Irish immigrant father in a San Francisco household that had just lost the woman at its center. To keep moving, to keep converting the next platform into the next commitment, to keep finding a room to enter and a microphone to take, and a jury to convince, and a donor to land, and a Senate committee to address, and a country to represent. The architecture, in other words, was built for Athens too. The architecture may have been built for Athens before Athens knew it was coming. That is where this series ends. Not with a verdict on the woman, not with a verdict on the relationships, not with a verdict on the ambassadorship, or the investigation, or the settlement, or the memoir that described the first marriage as going through the motions. The record holds all of those things. The record holds them at once. The series ends with the operating principle, the one she said into an empty hall in 2020, and the one she is still saying now. The best is yet to come. The architecture is still in motion. The work is still in front of her. Continue with the next installment, and the series will return to the small rooms, the donor suites, the cable news green rooms, and the courtroom in Los Angeles, where the architecture was first trained on juries who had not yet decided what they thought of the woman who was, even then, building the case.